The tall, gangly thing?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to High Roll Radio Insights. For anyone who may not be familiar with this show in particular, some of you may only know High Roll Radio, which is a live call-in show that I do on my channel. But High Roll Radio Insights is a little bit different. It's just me, first of all, no co-host. I did announce my constant co-host, Spicy Appies, joining the table for High Roll Radio. But High Roll Radio Insights is essentially a deep dive into different parts of competitive TFT. This is the second episode of this specific series, and in the first one, I covered the history of Mismatchsox, a player who many people kind of know for his absolute domination in Set 4, something where we've never quite seen such a gap between who we consider the best player in any given set versus the next best player. Even in sets like Sets 5, where we saw Robin and Spencer completely dominate, we kind of had two people who were always performing. So in this episode, actually, interestingly enough, we're going to be talking about the history of Liquid Robin, aka Robinsongz, a veteran of TFT in every sense of the word. He has basically been around the block since the birth of competitive TFT and a little bit before that, before we really established things. But at this point in time is essentially a household name. And the reason I wanted to talk about Robin is because I remember about a month ago, I was listening to Frodan's stream, and someone asked Frodan, they said, who would you consider to be the GOAT of TFT in North America? And I realized that I didn't necessarily have an immediate answer. You know, I think that there are a lot of players that when we kind of think back, we can pinpoint certain moments of brilliance, right? Like Robin, obviously, in Set 5 with a 1-1-1-5-1-1. We have Milk, the most decorated world's competitor in TFT, alongside DQA, interestingly enough, who also doesn't get as much attention. But Robin is in an interesting place because he's not consistently thought of as one of the best, despite the fact that he's had arguably the best results we've ever seen in TFT in North America. So I wanted to do this episode to break down his performance since competitive TFT has really come up and kind of come to the conclusion for myself whether I would consider him the GOAT or one of the GOATs of North American TFT. So with that, let's get right into it. We'll start at the beginning in Set 1. Set 1 and 2, I'm going to breeze through a little bit for two reasons. One, competitive TFT wasn't as established as it is now, so that we didn't really have tournaments in the same way. It was a lot of third-party grassroots events, but nothing official, nothing that we could point to objectively and say, like, hey, we're going to measure against this event, and this is going to be our baseline. Because things were it was the Wild West back then. So instead, I'm just going to talk a little bit about solo queue. Robin was a challenger player from the very beginning of the game. In Set 1, he peaked around rank mid-20s. I think 24 was the number that I estimated. Somewhere around the 700 to 900 LP range. And Set 2 was actually even lower. He peaked around 700 LP and kind of averaged between 5 and 700, which, you know, you could say that maybe the LP fluctuated set to set, and what was 500 in Set 2 may be different than now, but it's also important to keep in mind that back in Set 2, Mismatchsox was ranked 1 and 2 with something like 1800 LP and 1700 LP at the same time. So Robin was definitely not the ladder dominator. He was not the person that people are pointing to and saying like, oh man, this guy's tearing up the ladder. He's destroying everybody. That wasn't Robin. So where does Robin really start to get his footing? And I would say that it's in Set 3. Now in Set 3, we started the competitive TFT scene, but it wasn't what it is now. We didn't have these like Riot official events all throughout the set. Team Liquid actually hosted a series of qualifiers, which honestly, I need to do a podcast episode just on how insane these events were because they were so bad. And no flame to Liquid. I'm saying they're bad, but like no one did this stuff. They tried something new and it didn't work out. They were trying to create something from the ground up. But man, it was just a dumpster fire. They had this website that just didn't work. It crashed. The event took hours longer than people expected. All that to say, though, in set 3, there were these 8 weeks of qualifier tournaments, and Robin was actually the winner of week 3. And so by winning one of the qualifiers, he qualified for and the naming convention's crazy. It was something like the Team Liquid Qualifier Grand Finals, which essentially was the 8 winners of the qualifying event playing in a single event where the top 2 players make it to regionals. And Robin placed second behind Simple Plan. And this isn't 100% confirmed. It's hard to find the data here, but this is a mix of what I've been able to find and my memory of the time. And Robin places second and advances to regionals. And this is where, oh man, if anyone listened to when I had the opportunity to host the Jade Cup, I talked about this on stream there. I've talked about Robin being the most set resistant player, because in set 3, he placed 7th at regionals, making it to the final lobby, and began his streak of making the final lobby at every single regional event in North American TFT. There's not much else to say about set 3, to be honest. He made 7th, he placed 7th, he didn't advance to Worlds. That was the end of his competitive season for set 3, moved on to set 4. Now, this is where things start to kind of turn up a little bit for Robin. I would say at this point in time, he's not one of the biggest names in TFT. He's certainly not thought of as like the best player in North America, or maybe, I don't even think he's in the conversation for one of the best players, to be honest. But he starts streaming more. He quits his job, starts streaming full time, and he begins to place pretty well. Actually, if you're watching on YouTube, you can actually see I have a visual aid for people. So actually, if you're listening to the podcast version, it may be worth it to later on just check out the YouTube version so that you can see my visual aid where I have all of his tournament placements laid out alongside me. And for anyone who is watching the YouTube version, all of the placements in gold indicate that it is a final day performance. So in set 4, he starts to have these pretty strong performances, definitely not dominating. He places 18th at the first qualifier, but he places first. He wins the second qualifying event and then follows it up with a 4th place finish at the next one. This is actually, interestingly enough, the point in time where I started my personal content creation journey, and Robin was the first person to ever allow me to interview them I think it was actually after the 4th place finish. I don't think it was the first place finish, because the 4th place finish, his 4th place finish, that event was won by a Japanese American player whose name is escaping me right now, or it might have been a Korean American player. And I can't remember exactly what their name was, but after that event, Robin said he was interested in doing an interview with me. We sat down, we got to talk a little bit, and it was actually, the launching pad for me to really get into this. Anyway, that's just a quick aside. But set 4, Robin is streaming more. He's placing in these tournaments, and people are starting to watch him now. And this, I think, is the point in time where Robin starts to get this reputation, which is, and it's funny because if you think of it now, I think it really does make sense. Back then, if you think of who is Robinsongz, people would say like, oh, he's the player that is level 7-0 gold on 4-1 every single game. That's just the reputation he started to get. He plays for stability through stage 4 and is rolling down to 0 every single game to make sure that he's not going 8th. And he got this reputation as like he's a top 4 player. Like he plays to not lose the game. And it's funny because I feel like over time that's kind of developed into, set 5 or set 6, and all of a sudden he's the level 7 or level 8-0 gold. Like he's always playing for stability, but it kind of changed. Instead of like always going to 0 gold on 4-1, now he's kind of doing that on 4-5 or 5-1. But Robin was definitely more of like a risk averse player, plays for stability, plays for game plan, right? And even now he creates the TFT handbook, which if you haven't seen that, I'll link the website for that in the description. It's an incredible resource, and it really does show that Robin values going into a game, having an idea of what to play, and based on the opener that he's given, he wants to make a decision as soon as possible. So set 4, people start to see this. He starts to get this reputation. Regionals comes along, and once again, he finds himself in the finals, in the final lobby, places 8th. So both regionals, he's made final lobby and then gone 7th and 8th. So he's kind of bottoming out at all of these events. And then set 5 comes. And this is the turning point in Robin's career. If you're watching on YouTube right now, you'll actually see a pretty interesting visual kind of indication of this, which is that all of the tournaments he placed in have gold placements, which means that every single event he played in, he made final day. He made the final lobby. He got 5th at the second Challenger Series, tied for 5th in the Nightbringer Cup, which was essentially second place in his final lobby because it was 4 lobbies of 8 in the final day. So you could argue it's a second place finish, tied for second, however you'd want to say that. Mid-set finale, he places second behind Voidsin, who has this breakout tournament there. And then regionals has this absolutely legendary run where he wins 5 games out of 6, and then makes it to Worlds. So let's talk a little bit about the perception of Robin in set 5, because I think that things changed a lot during this set. And I actually remember I had a second interview with him in set 5, and I asked him, what changed between set 4, where people thought of you as maybe just like a normal challenger player who can win events if he high rolls, to now a tournament favorite? And he didn't have a great answer. And if I remember correctly, his answer was a little bit more like, it probably has to do with confidence. It probably has to do with experience. And he didn't really have some sort of like tangible evidence for this is what makes me the best player in the world. But everyone felt it. Everyone felt that Robin was now the tournament player in North America. Because on top of his individual performances, this set 5 was also the breakout of Ramblin' Robin, the duo team that won the Giant Slayer duo event. The name of the event is escaping me right now. And it really did feel like anything that Robin touches turns to gold. And he is just winning all across the board. He was well known at the time for his ability to play Jax and Lucian, like the Sentinel line. And at regionals, and I don't know if other people have a different opinion on this, but my perception of that was that regionals was this perfect storm of Robin is a game plan player. He wants to play what he's comfortable playing. He had a strong meta read, knowing that Jax and Lucian could play. They were the lines that he knew how to play best. And because he, 1, had a read on what was strong, and 2, his read lined up with what he was extremely comfortable with, because during that set, he was one of the premier Jax players going into that tournament. So he had this strong meta read, and it was within his comfort zone. It was a perfect storm for him to really play what he wanted. And obviously, there has to be some element of high roll for you to go 1-1-1-5-1-1. But the stars aligned, and Robin was able to make this incredible run and advance to the World Championship alongside Milk and Spencer. At Worlds, and I'll touch on Worlds just for a little bit because I want this to feel a little bit more focused on NA, but at Worlds, he doesn't make final day. He gets knocked out of the group stage, it might have been called at the time, which was essentially day 2. And I just remember feeling like it was so low roll. Like, I don't think that Robin was worse than the players that beat him. I remember distinctly him placing 4th in a game where he's playing Aphelios, which is like a 4-cost carry. And he is just stuck on Aphelios 1 all game long. Cannot find this Aphelios 2. There's like another player, I think it was the Japanese representative, who in one of the games like has Aphelios 2 at 3-2. Like, it was just like a wacky set of games. Robin was unfortunately not able to advance to final day. Milk actually does, which is when he goes Kled for the entire World Championship and ends up placing 3rd in North American fashion. But set 5 was absolutely this turning point in Robin's career, and really did give him, I think, this confidence to say that I am one of the best players in North America. We'll move on to set 6 now, which I think is an interesting set because we follow up set 5 where Robin is completely dominant with set 6 where honestly he's a bit all over the place. He starts off the set actually not even making final day in the Piltover Cup after he qualified for the 3rd day already. So he doesn't make it out of groups, if you want to look at it that way. I believe he places 5th in his lobby, doesn't advance to the final day, and then kind of goes on this up and down journey for the rest of the set. Makes final day at the Challenger Series, the one where Asa and Spicy Appies break out, but goes last, which I remember watching Jirachi's breakdown of that set, and they attributed Robin's poor performance to like a poor meta read, where everyone else I think is playing around 4 and 2 costs, and Robin's really trying to play around 3 costs for some reason. Then goes on to bounce back at the Zong Cup, place first. Huge win for Robin. I think it's absolutely important for kind of establishing consistency during this set, where otherwise it is up and down. And then 24th at the mid-set finale, which I think means that he got day 1. I don't know why I can't think of that math in my head, if that's like the last place finisher on day 2, or the closest to advancing but not on day 1. But honestly, just has a very up and down kind of set. But even with the up and down of this set, I think a lot of people still kind of held Robin in high-ish regard. In the Don't Talk If You Know power rankings, he was consistently within this middle of the pack range. I want to say, without looking at it right now, I want to guess that he's kind of always between 4 and 8, and he doesn't really move that much, because even if he's not dominating on ladder, people just kind of assume, well, yeah, Robin may not be able to win every single event. He may not always be dominating, but he's going to show up when it matters. And I think largely that's true. And we'll kind of look at some of the additional data at the end of this episode too. So up and down season, comes back to regionals, and once again makes final day, and once again places 7th. So Robin has made regionals 4 times and has placed 7th, 8th, 1st, and 7th. So kind of has this weird trend of making finals and just bottoming out for whatever reason. Probably just a variance thing, but still kind of interesting to note. And then set 7 comes around. And I don't want to linger too long on like the details of every single event. I hope that's not boring all the listeners, but set 7 is an interesting event, because he does make final day in every single event. But for whatever reason, I think we just didn't realize that he was doing that. And it partly could be because of the format changes. People were kind of getting used to what tournaments looked like at the time. But Robin makes final day at every single event in set 7 and makes final lobby in 3 of the 5. And this is kind of an important distinction, and I don't even know if I'm really being fair by not just calling all of these final day in the same way that I would have called it for set 5. But in set 7, he places 23rd in the Astral Cup and 17th in the Dragon Cup, which is still final day, but it's not making the final cutoff. I feel like even maybe saying top 16 would have been considered like final lobby or final cutoff or top cut of these events. Personally, I didn't mark them that. I kind of considered it's all final day, but he didn't quite make the top cutoff in all of them. I would consider that in 3 of the 5. So what's interesting about this, though, is as someone who's on the Don't Talk If You Don't Know power rankings panel, pretty much none of us realized how good of a season Robin had until the season was over. And we're doing our end of set rankings, and we're looking back and saying like, oh my gosh, like Robin can't lose. He's too good. So I think a part of this too is because his actual average placement was low. When I say low, it probably, if I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's probably between 4.2 to 4.4, and it's maybe even 4.5. It's this number that basically says I'm always advancing, but I'm not always placing at the top. And the data's not super fair here, because if you think about it, the more games you play, the closer you should be getting to the average, which is going to be 4.5. And the more you play, the higher chance you have to have a lower average, because if you advance to the final day and then go 7th, or final day and then go 23rd like he did in the Astral Cup, your final day numbers are going to influence your average placement. So there's definitely value in AVP. I really love that stat. It's one of the reasons that I still track it as much as I do, but it definitely is not the telltale stat. There's much more to the story. So Robin very quietly has this beautiful set 7, which I think really establishes this through line of Robin always being able to show up when it matters. And obviously, again, making regionals in set 7, and then once again placing 7th. That's a third time in his career now that he's placed 7th in the final day. But also, it's solidified him as the only player to have made every single final day at every single regional finals. For a while, this was actually kind of combated by Kurum, who had made final day at every single regional finals apart from set 6. And if I actually did, I'm going to look this up. I was really trying to not do any like stat lookup while I was recording this, but I'm going to look this up real quick because I don't remember if he made regionals in set 7. He actually did. So Kurum is the only other player to have a similar stat, but he didn't compete in set 6, so obviously was not able to qualify for regionals if he didn't compete. So all that to say, Robin does maintain this streak, and now we're looking at set 8. So set 8, at the time of recording this, we're halfway through the season. 8.5 is out. We've had 3 tournaments, the Corrupted Cup, the Defender Cup, and the mid-set finale. And coming up this weekend is actually the first weekend of the Mecha Cup. Robin has already qualified for the second weekend. And on top of that, he actually won the Box $20,000 TFT Survivor Boot Camp. Robin has been absolutely dominant on the ladder. He is first in ladder snapshots, meaning that assuming everything goes according to plan, he is most likely guaranteed his spot at regionals no matter what happens at the Mecha Cup. And on top of that, is still looking like a favorite to actually win or place well at the Mecha Cup by a lot of people. It's hard to really root against him, especially when he's performing well on ladder, because now he not only has the consistency of, peak Robin or tournament Robin to show up on game day, but he also is just stomping on ladder, which is not something that we're used to. So set 8, he did have a bit of an up and down. He placed really well at the Defender Cup, placing 3rd, had a poor showing at the Corrupted Cup, not making the final day, placing 40. Oh, actually not even making it to the final weekend. 49th place would mean that he played in the open portion of the event and did not qualify for the final weekend, right? Oh, no, that's incorrect. I apologize. He made day 3 and then lost there. But still, poor performance for Robin, not something we're used to seeing out of him. And it's actually the first time, because he had a 15th place in the mid-set finale, it is the first time in his entire career that he's placed outside the final day twice in a row in the same set. There have been some where you could look at it like across sets where I think it would have been that he placed... Actually, no, it's literally the first time... Oh, no. So the only difference would be mid-set finale to Innovation Cup of 6 to 6.5. But here, in set 8, within the same half set, he places outside the final day in 2 tournaments in a row, which is the first time since the inception of competitive TFT that we have seen that happen to Robinsongz. And I think if that's the shocking part about a player's performance, that they didn't make final day twice in a row, and after 6 sets, it's the first time that it's ever happened to them. You have to look at that and say, like, well, we must be expecting more out of this player than other people, right? So I feel like that does kind of wrap up a little bit, pretty much all of his career, I guess. The last thing I really want to say about set 8 is that he does have the opportunity, obviously, to continue this trend and place final day in the regional finals, but at some point in time, that streak has to end. What's interesting, though, and I think really cool to hold on to, is that Robin has continued this streak up until now and is the sole owner of this streak. And he should be able to retire whenever he does, saying that this was something he was able to do that nobody else in North America had been able to do. And I don't know that there really is any sort of argument, to be honest, about whether we've seen this level of consistency out of any other player. Let me give you this stat. Ready? Looking at the result of his career, he is more than twice as likely to make final day or final lobby than anybody than he is to not. Let me say that again. He is twice as likely to make final lobby than he is to not make final lobby. If you have to make a bet on who is going to show up in the finals, Robin is probably the best bet to make at any given time. Looking at TFT as a collective timeline, Robin is the most consistent player in North American TFT. With that said, even looking back across the last couple sets as the Don't Talk If You Don't Know panel has been a thing, he's really only ever lived in this 4 to 6 or 4 to 8 range. And that does beg the question of, should you consider a player who has not consistently been on top or has not been on top number one multiple times in their career the greatest of all time? It's a good question. It really is, and it's kind of the only reason that I think I didn't snap decision and say Robin is the best of all time, absolutely no question. But the reality is, this is a game of variance, and we have to recognize that just because Robin didn't always have the absolute number one strongest performances in multiple sets doesn't mean that he actually wasn't the best number one player in 2 sets or in 3 sets or more at any given point in time. There's so much information about TFT that we can't really collect that it's hard to be certain that our assumptions about players are correct, because most of the time they're probably not. So if I had to choose right now who the GOAT of North American TFT is, I would choose Liquid Robin. I don't think that anybody else in North America has the scope of work that Robin has had. And to me, I think that it's valuable enough to say that confidently, Robin is the greatest of all time. As of right now, halfway through set 8, it's currently April 14th, 2023. So maybe, 2 years down the road, I'll look back at this episode and laugh. But for now, I think that there's a very strong argument, and I'm going to stick to my guns and say that if I had to choose right now and TFT ends, I would say it's Robin. And that's going to do it for Hyrule Radio Insights. I'm actually streaming this live right now on Twitch. This is a secret stream. I don't think very many people are watching it, but you know what? It's been a lot of fun to do this. If you aren't already watching Hyrule Radio, or if you haven't already watched that, it's also a live call-in show where Spicy Appies and myself take on viewers to give their takes or questions or discussion points, and we talk about it live on stream. So if you don't already, follow me on Twitter at gangly_, or follow Hyrule Radio on Twitter as well at Hyrule Radio. If you are watching the podcast right now, it does go a long way. If you rate us 5 stars, tell your friends about it. If you're watching on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. If you're watching on Spotify, we normally have some sort of question and answer or poll or some interactive element to it. All of these really do go a long way in helping us build out the show and show people that people are interested in watching it. So really, thank you everybody for tuning in for the second episode of Hyrule Radio Insights, and I'll catch you next time.